Thank you so much. Now let's ring the bell. Thank you all. Now, the Online Education Leadership Forum was started with the objective to provide a platform for education leaders to shape, empower, influence, and advance the discourse on, and be a springboard aiding action towards transforming education for human flourishing. With the COVID-19 situation and its implications looming over our heads, we understand that social emotional well-being and academic success are a major concern for most school leaders, parents, and education professionals. Through the Education in the Times of Corona online series, the Council for Global Citizenship Education and the Global Citizenship Foundation are committed to support school leaders by connecting experts, practitioners, and education leaders from across the globe to discuss and share ideas, best practices, and perspectives to navigate and lead through this crisis. Our goal today is that whatever your role is in the education sector, that you will come away with something, a new idea, a fresh perspective, a new strategy that you can apply to be more successful at doing what you're doing best. So here's the format to give you an idea of what to expect. First, we'll take a few moments to briefly introduce our awesome panelists from India, the European Union, and the United States. Then I'll kick off the conversation by opening the floor to the panelists. In the second half of our time today, we'll open the floor to give you an opportunity to ask specific questions that you've been thinking about to help you navigate in the present and also the upcoming opportunities, issues, and challenges that you have. If this sounds good, let's get started with the panel introductions. So I take great pleasure to welcome Dr. Ashok Pandey, the Chairperson of the Council for Global Citizenship Education and Director of Alcon Group of Schools, India. He's the author of Launch Inspiring Education Leadership and The Pedagogical Life, Essays on Educating India. A very warm welcome to you, sir. We also have with us Dr. Paul Donis, who's the Associate Professor of Education at the Department of Psychology and also the Director of Educational Disadvantage Center at the Institute of Education, Dublin City University, and Affiliate Professor at the University of Malta's Center for Resilience and Social Emotional Health, with over 100 publications in the areas of education, psychology, philosophy, law, anthropology, and social policy. He has given lectures and presentations in 29 countries. His reports on social emotional education, early school leaving, multidisciplinary teams, and bullying have been published by the European Commission. It's my great pleasure to welcome you, Professor. We also have with us Dr. Nandini Chatterjee, a cognitive neuroscientist and currently the Senior Program Officer at UNESCO MGIEP. Dr. Nandini works on social emotional learning, literacy, emotions, and music. She leads the Rethinking Learning team at MGIEP and has been at the cutting edge of SEL development at UNESCO MGIEP. A very warm welcome to you, ma'am.
Thank you.
And we also have with us Dr. Ameeta Mulla Wattal, who has worked in the sphere of education, creative arts, special needs, theater, women's education, peace studies, and curriculum development for over 4 decades. Dr. Ameeta has held several posts in India and beyond, both at school and university levels. She's also the recipient of the prestigious National Teachers Award by the Government of India. A very warm welcome to you, Dr. Ameeta.
Thank you very much.
We also have with us Ivan Whitehead, who's the Director of Special Services at Lindop School District 92 in Illinois. Currently, he oversees all federal programs. He also overlooks early childhood education, multi-tiered system of support, that's MTSS, health services, social emotional learning, family, and community engagement. So a very warm welcome to Ivan. It's so good to have you too.
Thank you.
Also, I'd like to express our deep gratitude to Learning A to Z, a literacy-focused pre-K to 6 technology-enabled learning solutions provider based out of United States. They're powering this panel discussion, and I'm happy to tell you that they are supporting learners in over 180 countries. So we express our gratitude to them, to all our viewers across platforms, to our panelists, and to everyone involved. So now I open the floor by requesting Dr. Nandini Chatterjee Singh to make her opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Aaryan, and hello, everybody. This morning, as I watched the news, I also began to realize that May is Mental Wellness Month. So in many ways, this couldn't have been a more timely timing for this particular panel to happen. So whilst it's being located in the times of COVID-19, I think the discussion that we're going to have today is actually relevant for teachers, education, and learning across all times. Okay. So because I come from a background in cognitive neuroscience, I think
Okay, can you hear me, Dr. Nandini?
yes.
Yeah,
Now
I'm
can you
so
hear
sorry.
me?
Yeah.
So could you share the beginning or no?
No, we couldn't hear you.
Okay. So I'm sorry about that. But I wanted to say at the beginning that there couldn't be a better time for this to happen because May is Mental Wellness Month, and social and emotional learning being the forefront of mental wellness. I think this has been a very timely discussion that we are having today. And discussion this probably holds true not just for times of COVID-19, but for school education in general and for people across the world at all times. So because I come from a background in cognitive neuroscience and I work with the human brain, I want to start out by showing you one picture of the human brain, which will bring to home immediately why there can be no learning unless there is social and emotional learning. Okay? And that's this. Okay. So I'm going to share a slide on the screen, and I hope this works out well to show you that here is a picture of the human brain. And what you will see is an area in red, which is the limbic system or the emotion brain. Okay. And what you see in blue, okay, is the prefrontal cortex. Okay. And that's the front on top of your brain. And the limbic system is embedded deep inside your brain. What you will also see is a bunch of fibers through all of the connections that you see. And the prefrontal cortex, or the thinking brain, is structurally connected to the limbic system or the emotional brain. Okay? So, in short, the point I want to bring home to you is whenever the brain learns, the social and emotional system is engaged. And if the social and emotional system is disturbed, learning cannot happen. Because in the simple biology of the brain, the glucose that's there in the brain is so busy feeling and trying to keep secure that the brain has no energy left to learn. So unless we bring in social and emotional learning in the classroom, children are really not going to be able to learn. That's the simple basic understanding that we now have from the biology of the brain. Okay. So if that's so apparent, and it's something that we've probably all known in our lives, if you go back and think in history about when you learned in school, you often remember learning that happened because of teachers who were kind and caring, or learning that happened when there was an emotional event around it. Sometimes it's a traumatic event, but because there's an emotional link to it, you remember that event. Okay, and these are examples of really to tell you that how emotion is linked to learning. Indeed, if that is the case, what we really need to do is how do we embed social and emotional learning in our classroom? Okay. And at that point in time, it probably becomes relevant for teachers to come into the picture too, to realize that rather than just going through a lesson plan, one from the beginning to the end, without realizing whether it fits into social context or it is able to engage or motivate a child, learning is not going to happen. And that's really the learning that we want to bring into the classroom. So children need to periodically be made aware that they have feelings that they need to connect to so that learning is happening in the classroom. And now that we know so much about how the intellectual brain is linked to the emotional brain, it becomes very relevant that we bring this into our classrooms. Over the course of the discussion, what I hope we will unravel for you is learning and the social emotional development of a child happens all through development. But there are particular periods in development, like adolescence, when there is more of a change that happens in the brain. Okay. So for instance, the limbic cortex or the emotional cortex develops before the thinking cortex. Okay. And many of us who have been teenagers and many of you who are youngsters know that the probability of risky behavior, of behavior where you really just react to your emotions happens much more during adolescence. So now, if we can bring in training programs such that we are able to train and regulate our emotions, learning can become a lot more useful and your responses can be a lot more regulated. So that's the second important point that we've realized over the years, that social and emotional learning can be taught. Just like you can teach children literacy and numeracy, you can teach children social and emotional learning. And the third point where I want to end up with is all learning happens because of a process called neuroplasticity. Okay? So your brain changes once you learn. Okay? You form new circuits. And just like when you exercise and form new muscles in the body, similarly, you form new muscles in the brain. You form new circuits in the brain. So when your learning circuits include the social and emotional areas of the brain too, your learning is robust, it's permanent, and it's lifelong. And that's really what we want to bring into classrooms today. And over the course of the discussion, we will share with you activities that you can do in your classrooms so that this social and emotional learning can actually become part of your classrooms. Thank you, Aaryan. I think I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nandini. I yield the floor to Professor Paul Donis.
Thank you, Aaryan. I want to emphasize, first of all, that at a European Commission level now, that there is a new key competence in education in Europe, which focuses on social and emotional learning. This is a new development since 2018 that places social and emotional education through the key competence is called personal, social, and learning to learn key competence. So the personal and social part is new, and this will have big implications across Europe for a focus on social and emotional learning. Also to emphasize for teachers that the traditional division of Descartes between the mind and the heart for education is no longer valid. So that, in other words, social emotional learning does not only help emotions based on international research, it also helps academic learning. So learning improves with social emotional education across various different dimensions, as well as, of course, things like motivation, attitude to school, engagement with other people. So international research, there's strong evidence now, to support these very substantial gains, including for people at risk of, of drug use, crime prevention, that social emotional education can be key also there as well. So having sort of started with that important sort of point for social emotional education, I want to now emphasize what it cannot do, okay? So it is not a panacea to address things such as poverty, okay? We still need to address poverty-related issues. Also, a teacher is not being envisaged with social emotional learning or social emotional education as being a therapist, all right? So we're not asking teachers to go into deep traumas of children and become amateur therapists. We're not asking them to, invade about the family dynamics and ask probing questions about what's going on in the family. It's very much about current emotions of a child. And so the teacher's role is for stress prevention and also for mental health promotion or well-being promotion. So I think that they're important points to make. So for example, for the COVID-19 crisis, you're going to have many young people who are maybe experiencing domestic violence or bereavement. And social emotional education, I think, is not a panacea for that. You need emotional counselors, therapists to go into the complexity of their needs. Moving forward then, also in terms of the conditions for which you can have a school environment that will support social emotional education, it has to be one where there's trust, where there's a basic school climate of warmth, where it's not a fear-based teaching climate. And we see from the World Health Organization that in many countries, a lot of young people do, from at least some teachers, experience an attitude of fear and condemnation. The term the WHO Health Organization uses, public humiliation in some situations. So we cannot have social emotional education in a climate ruled by fear. Also, social emotional education is linked to children's voices. The children can express themselves. It's not just something being done to children, it's with children as part of their voice and their expression. So I think they're important points to emphasize. What I'd also say is that there is a great opportunity to embed social emotional learning across the curriculum. So our report for the European Commission has argued it needs to be a subject by itself on the curriculum, but it can also go across many areas of the curriculum. So for example, in history, two key competences for social emotional learning of empathy and perspective taking. Empathy and perspective taking, if teachers think from how can we develop the empathy skills of students and the perspective taking approaches, so they can see things from different perspectives. So this is relevant for not only for history, you can argue even for geography, you can argue that for, in drama and role play, conflict resolution issues. So it can go, the other emphasis I would put beyond empathy and perspective taking is putting language on feelings. That is a distinct skill. Many people struggle with it. So being able to have a culture where people are comfortable with naming their emotions and expressing their emotions is a key gift. Because someone mentioned earlier there about impulsivity, that one way to in some way, not just react impulsively is to be able to put things into language, to be able to be aware of your feelings. So these are key gifts that can go across the curriculum as well. I would also then just raise that, in light of the COVID-19 and the increased anxiety issues, there is also, I think, a big room here for sort of meditation responses, breathing responses. We see increasing studies in schools about how breathing can help calm children, can help, calm many groups. So I think that's a whole area that is ripe for development, and obviously the strong Eastern traditions of that in meditation. So I think there's issues there to explore, especially around anxiety-related issues. And this is where I'd also bring up an area that has been neglected, in my view, in social emotional education, and that is existential issues, search for meaning in life. We now have a situation where many people maybe are forced into self-isolation or social distancing. So now they no longer have maybe the group around them. They're confronting mortality in the existential tradition, and you hear of being towards death, as an existential theme. So I think we need a vision for existential approaches about how you make sense of life, how you find meaning in life with existential aspects. I would also put forward very much the restorative practice approach internationally. I think it's a very simple approach. I use it with my teachers. I'm one of my roles is I teach psychology in the classroom to teachers, and restorative practice approaches are usually questions. Very often our young student teachers in a conflict situation with pupils or students, they try to respond with an instruction rather than a question. So we try to encourage our students to listen to the stories of the child, even the child who may seem to be, say, for example, the bully perpetrator. So you need listening skills of teachers, as well as to respond with questions rather than instructions. So to listen and ask questions, and restorative practice, which is not the same as restorative justice. Restorative practice approaches encourage the children to gain these empathy and perspective taking skills. My last point I would just make is that obviously with a certain amount of classes now being online due to social distancing in schools, there is the question about what is lost by that. And I think we have to acknowledge the concern from a social emotional learning perspective that the relationship building parts could be lost. Many children may feel very self-conscious in front of cameras, and so I think there's a task here to create tasks at home that are meaningful for the children, that engage their emotions, and that we could use if schools are not, are not meeting face to face, that we create meaningful tasks engaging children's emotions across the curriculum. Also with the arts is a key resource here for doing that. So there are just some initial thoughts on this area.
Thank you so much, Professor Paul. I would request Dr. Ameeta Mulla Wattal to make her remarks. Hello.
Thank you so much. I hope you can hear.
Yes.
I hope you can hear me clearly now.
Hello.
You can hear me?
Yes, Dr. Ameeta.
Can I be heard?
Yes, yes.
Aaryan, can I be heard? Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I think having given me the opportunity for being here, I would like to say that the previous speakers have so seamlessly moved into this whole area of SEL. And it's interesting how Nandini spoke about trauma. And I think SEL has been around forever, because I remember that I was a child of war. And at the age of 14, my entire world suddenly collapsed, along with my childhood dreams and aspirations and goals and relationships, when my father suddenly, his ship was torpedoed by an enemy submarine and it sank to his watery grave. And I did not find equivalent to the Victoria Cross. But what I do want to say is that all I felt was a great sense of being abandoned, alienation, and rage. And suddenly all the things that mattered to me had no meaning at all. And it was a sort of a shock and awe moment that I wasn't prepared for, very much like the pandemic, which is affecting students today and young adults. And I still wonder, why do adults keep assuming that children, whatever age they can be, can self-regulate, can self-manage, and self-empathize? My sister spent a very large part of her childhood wiping my mother's tears, whereas I spent my time hanging on to a letter that was given to me just before my father passed away from the ship. And it was a dashboard of SEL, and a very interesting dashboard, because in the words of those letter, I was able to glean certain things that talked to me about collaboration and mindfulness and creativity and practice and empathy. They all came out through the letter. So I sort of hung on to it, because at that time, there were very few people who understood the whole concept of SEL. And so I would say that I wanted to become a practitioner, a teacher, and bring that into my life of my students, because these were fundamental things that children need to know. The skills, how to cope. And I think it's so important that these kind of skills must get into schoolrooms today. It's very, very essential, because students today are grappling with identity. They're grappling with self-esteem. They're grappling with conflict resolution. They're grappling with mindfulness. And these are all issues that are connected even to what is happening with the pandemic today. We keep talking about SEL. We talk about it in symposias. We talk about it in seminars, but it just sort of hangs in the air. Nobody gives any sort of response to this hanging in the air kind of thing. In fact, the question keeps floating around, and it becomes the sort of realm of only of counselors. For some reason, SEL goes into the counseling group, the psychological group, and so on. And so what happens? Teachers get stuck with just transacting content. And schools become that with all the grades and the scores, and all these things don't matter anymore. So I think today, more than ever, especially, we need our young who are being triggered and flooded and overwhelmed. We need very much the compass of emotional intelligences. We need the compass of SEL, that we need it to be integrated within our curriculum. So what I would like to say is that the Delhi government, in a very interesting manner, has brought in the happiness curriculum into schools. And the happiness curriculum is very integral to the SEL concept. And this curriculum, interestingly, was launched 2 years ago, but it has become a sort of a panacea for underprivileged children today who are not being connected with their learning or with their study. And these children now who are alienated, who are alone, who have a certain sense of despair, are finding solace in this happiness curriculum, which is being conveyed in so many different ways that what is going on. Now, I think it's very important that the online phenomena that is taking place is not looking at the core purpose of learning. It's not looking at the whole understanding of what are we learning for. It's just looking at a response to the crisis. And so there's a whole lot happening with children today in the pandemic, that this online is just keeping them engaged with some content. And this is a very frightening feeling, because across the webinars that one has been a part of, children are asking questions. All the time there are questions. What happened to yesterday? What's going on today? And what's going to happen tomorrow? And these questions may seem insignificant to an adult who's grappling with the pandemic. But to the child, it's a cry for coping with their emotions. I believe that the Indian school system has tried very hard to incorporate SEL. We have certain types of activities. We have, social justice initiatives. We have so many different things that happen. But unfortunately, we get lost in the whole activity milieu. And that's what becomes very problematic. So we're looking at a very challenging space now, because children are going to come back to us and they're going to be fragmented. There are groups that are going to be very good and they've understood the content and they're coming from a very privileged section. There are groups who are coming from a mediocre learning experience, and there are groups who are going to be coming from a very, 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 very basic level, completely unnurtured, underprivileged. Now, it's a work of the school to ensure that the first thing we do when these children come in back is to look at SEL in a very big way and ensure that it gets incorporated into the curriculum. Otherwise, we're going to have huge issues of mindset. We're going to have an existential crisis, because the children will wonder, what is the purpose? What is the meaning of what they're doing or what they feel or who they are? So it's a tall order, but it's a must. Let's not get back to examinations and terminals and so on and so forth. Let's get back into this whole world of how do we look and cope with our children's feelings. And I think it is important that in the next couple of months or a year, we look at that with a deep dive. We should stop so much of involvement right now with just the reading and the writing. We should think, can my child express tenderness? Can my child express trust? Can he cope with anxiety? Can he cope with fear? Can he stand up when everything has gone wrong? And if our education system is not being able to look at the survival, sanity, and health and the mental health of the children, then we may as well are only looking at employability. Then what is the education for? So I think if we're looking at a holistic learning of children, it is imperative that we bring in SEL as an elective course subject into our board examinations, into our classes. And whether it is gender justice, whether it is environmental literacy, whether it is global citizenship, whether it is any type of empathetic response to mankind, we must incorporate it as an elective along with the physics, chemistry, math, because it's very clear today, nothing seems to be helping. The only thing that is helping us to cope right now is being resilient, which is a very important part of SEL. So I think helping children to move from the intimate to the ultimate, from the local to the global, that's what SEL will probably help us in that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ameeta. Now I would request Ivan to go forward.
Thank you, Aaryan. I appreciate it, and peace and blessings to everyone today. I just want to say that we are in a new and unprecedented times. But fortunately, what I do feel is that this has opened the door and has initiated the conversation that many of us have been speaking about for years. And the reality is this, is that unless you address the social emotional well-being of humans, not just children of humans, nothing else matters. So as we think about what we're doing for humanity.
Ivan, I don't think so we can hear you clearly. So I think there's an issue. Yeah, it's better now.
Better? Okay. So as we think about that and what that means in terms of a focus, a global focus on social emotional wellness and well-being, we have to think about, what we can do. So the conversation in terms of SEL into education is very important. But for many of us, we've always talked about this. Here in the state of Illinois in the United States, we have had social emotional learning standards for over 2 decades. So in terms of that being a part of education is great. But the thing about it is that it's not an add-on. This is not something else. This is not an additional course, it's not additional curriculum. It's what we do and how we need to do business. And when we think about it in terms of social emotional learning competencies, such as self-awareness, being able to identify our emotions, accurate self-perception, self-confidence, self-efficacy, social awareness, perspective thinking, empathy, appreciating diversity, respect for others, responsible decision-making, identifying problems, evaluating, reflecting, ethical responsibility, self-management, such as impulse control, self-discipline, self-motivation, goal setting, and relationship skills. And this is the one that I want to really put a focus on, is relationship skills, because it's communication, social engagement, relationship building, and teamwork. And this is where we are right now, because this current state in the pandemic has put us in a situation in which we all have to now rely on these competencies to not only just live and survive, but also what's next. Oftentimes we think about, how can we integrate this into the education system? Well, social emotional learning is everything that we do, right? It can be implemented from every course, whether it's literacy, mathematics, science, social studies. Every time you have an opportunity to interact with children and students, all of those competencies that I just spoke to can be integrated into that. If you're reading a story, right, there's opportunities to discuss those competencies in terms of relationship skills, decision-making, social awareness. It's all integrated. It's not an add-on. And I think that that's a key point to understand. The other point is that, we heard a little bit about, the structures, and I think about that in terms of need versus readiness. Need versus readiness. So obviously there's a need for SEL. We all know that. We understand that. We all understand that the previous construct of education that we had in the box that once existed no longer exists, and then the box has been destroyed. But the reality is, what is the readiness for us to implement and to really think about as a system what SEL means, and how do we do that? Well, one, we have to think about it like this. I always consider SEL in terms of a 3-pronged approach. What are we doing for students? What are we doing for families? And also, what are we doing for our own staff? Because the reality is, if our staff who are supposed to be implementing instruction, if they do not have the level of readiness to implement social emotional learning, then it doesn't matter. We can have the best programs in the world. We can have all the research and evidence-based programs. We can talk about what needs to happen. But if our staff do not also have the ability to implement the curriculum, implement SEL, because oftentimes they themselves do not have that foundation in their lives, and we're asking them to do something they may not be prepared for. So what does that look like? Well, one big thing, especially now, is educator self-care and wellness, right? So much is going on right now. So much is going on in the lives of educators. Most educators now have a new experience, where at once we've always had multiple roles and responsibilities, but now those roles and responsibilities are taking place simultaneously in our lives. We can't put them into compartments. We can't put them in the compartment of spouse, significant other, parent, educator, teacher, caregiver. They're all taking place simultaneous right now during this day and time. We have to think about also, how are we doing that? How are we managing that to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves as well, so that we can do what we need to do? And so as I think about that in terms of those pieces, I truly believe that, one, the structure needs to be in place. It has to be conducive for learning, and not just academic, but also social emotional learning. Two, the other part is that we have to make sure that the families that we're serving, right? True family community engagement. What does that mean? Do we have the foundation that exists to make sure that what we're doing and what we're implementing in the school can also be replicated or supported by the families as well? Because we have a limited time for that. The last piece is, what are we doing for staff? And when I think about that, I talk about, I have my 3 Bs: balance, boundaries, and breaks. And that's rooted in mindfulness and dialectical behavioral therapy. And it really means this: what are you doing, and how do you balance your time, energy, and efforts? Is it putting into people, places, and things and projects that are reciprocal? Next, the boundaries, not just the boundaries of others, but your own. Are you trying to do everything for everybody, or are you sticking to what that means and making sure that it's okay to say no at times, so you have that piece? And the last one is breaks. Are we taking that time out for ourselves to make sure that we're okay? Are we taking that time to fill our cup before we try to fill the cup of others? Because it's truly important that we do that. So as we talk about this moving forward, making sure that we look at SEL as not something that we do, but it's just the way that we do business and what it is. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ivan. I would request Dr. Pandey to make his remarks. So Dr. Pandey, can mainstreaming SEL ensure effective learning and well-being? Dr. Pandey, you're on mute. If you can unmute yourself, please.
I was so excited. So thank you, Aaryan. Thank you, my distinguished panelists. I was listening very carefully, very attentively, and I have come across one design which I want to share with all of you. Dr. Nandini, in her remark, gave a beautiful structure to the SEL center in our brain. Dr. Paul developed on that structure and gave a beautiful process as to how it can be laid out. And then Dr. Ameeta came and she gave a practicum for that what are the practical aspects of it and how that structure and design can be developed further. And then Dr. Ivan has given in a very teacher-like that if something like that is coming, what are the outcomes expected? So you have to have an outcomes. It has to be futuristic. It has to be global in nature. So he has given the learning outcomes kind of thing. So imagine somebody like me coming in at this stage when a structure is there, process is there, design is there, objectives are very well defined, then what role do I have to play? And I think the only role left to me is to be an advocate for all my panelists. So I am prepared to do advocacy for SEL, but a couple of remarks I would say, the ultimate aim of a spiritual attainment and the highest aspiration of personal development. These things come from what we are talking about SEL. You see, the whole idea is that the only cognitive things or the textbook generated knowledge that we talk about is not adequate to achieve those objectives of personal development or spiritual development. And therefore, we have to think about the connection of the person with his or her world. And this has been very beautifully described by one of our foremost teachers, Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore, as atmosphere around the child. And that atmosphere he has defined as geographical atmosphere, the environmental atmosphere, the family, home, traditions, culture, values, and how children make their sense and interaction with that is something which defines the social and emotional learning. So we have to combine these two, as my previous speakers have already said. And I was just noting down. I think Professor Paul said that it improves cognition at the same time. In fact, there is a 2017 study by Taylor and his colleagues, and they have established that the children who have come out of SEL education integrated into their curriculum pedagogy gained 13 percentile points in comparison to those who did not get that. So it is well established already. There is no doubt about that. And therefore, what we have to do is, we have to bring these children in interaction with the atmosphere. And it is said that if a child has not sown a seed, has not seen a plant growing, has not climbed a tree, has not had a quarrel with friends, and not learned how to solve conflicts and resolve conflicts, will never know how nature balances itself. So if nothing more is available in support of SEL, I think these are some of the very important things that should assure us that without full hog integration of SEL into our mainstreaming, we cannot ensure the well-being of our children. And Ivan has already talked about the competencies. So I'm not going to repeat that, but I'm only saying that there are two aspects of SEL education mainstreaming. One is that it will build your competency in terms of self and social awareness, the relationship, the management of the self and things like that. But at the same time, the guiding principles on which SEL implementation is based on is, can we create a very safe and fearless environment around them? Can we integrate it? Can we, Dr. Ameeta said that it has to be part of this, and can we bring it as part of our teaching and learning and assessment process? So these are two or three very important guiding principles. There are core competencies coming out of it, and there is a design, there is a process, there is a structure. And I think Dr. Nandini said something very important, that the May is the month of mental well-being. And probably I think this webinar should come out very strongly in favor of integrating SEL and not only allowing it to look at the entire well-being of the child from a periphery. I will just end by, for the viewers, only two lines, one the beginning and the one is the end of the famous Rabindranath Tagore's, where the mind is without fear and the head is held high. And at the end, he goes on to complete, where the mind is led forward into ever widening thought and action, into that haven of freedom, my Father, let us all move in. You see, so I think that is the essence of a child's well-being. And socio-emotional learning, as panelists have said, is not something new. Centuries before their importance have been recognized, this is the right time to bring them at center stage. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pandey, and to all the panelists. So now we will move on to the question and answer session with the moderator. So my first question is to Ivan. So how have you been integrating SEL? Can you narrate your experience of how you began with SEL? Because since I know that you've been with SEL for a very long time, and what was the reception and what are the outcomes that you have seen at the end of the entire intervention?
Sure, thank you. So as you said, I've been doing SEL and working with that in that space for quite some time, and that's based upon my background is as a special education teacher. So as a teacher, I always work with students with social emotional learning and emotional disabilities. So that has always been rooted into my work. And as I changed roles, that stayed my foundation. So it never left. So even though I changed roles and I, was in building administration, I was over discipline for students, I always knew the need of social emotional learning and wellness was important, because once you look at that and you address that, anything else can happen. The academics will fall in line. So that's always been my course. In terms of the implementation of that, what I've done is, as I said, I've always tried to look at it three-pronged approach, because you can't do one without the other two. You can't look at just how do you do it just for students, but you don't think about the adults. You can't do it without thinking about the adults and students without the families, because it all has to be a collaborative partnership. And, especially now more than ever, it's important to do that, because now that we're in this time, which I refer to more as physical distancing, not social distancing, because as we talk about the physical distancing of one another, we can't now leave out, we don't want the social part to be affected by that, right? We still have to look at ways in which we can come together. And, what I've done in terms of implementation is not only with my own school district, but others, but particularly with my own, we've always looked at how can we do this? So we had a foundation of providing social emotional support for our teachers in terms of getting them the information that they need to teach students. The next part is that because we started that foundation with the students and then also with our families, when this pandemic started, we already had investments into the social emotional capital, if you will, with our families, so that now that we're in this state that we can't be physically in the same space, we have the respect, we have the type of safety that the families feel that they can trust us now. The other part is that, when we started this physical distancing, approximately 7 weeks ago for us here in the States and in Illinois, the first week was phenomenal. It was energetic. People were excited. It was something new. The second week, we did a lot of planning. By that third week, you could physically see the energy levels of the adults begin to decrease. You could see that on their face, because what we all tried to do, and maybe some of us are still trying to do now, is that we're trying to replicate what we did for 6.5, 7 hours within a building into a virtual environment. We know that that's not sustainable. As good as it is to be able to see and to have this opportunity to interact with people, the reality is that the energy that it takes to be focused, to be engaged in a virtual situation is a lot more than a physical in-person meeting. So we began to be mindful about that, and we changed the way our instruction and our daily schedule looked. So now we have a more balance for that. We try not to have students on, visual online, because we know screen time is a challenge. We have to also implement that when it comes to academics. The other part is that we looked at a way that we can give back to our staff. And we did that by, implementing a program that was created by myself and my colleague, Kavita Tana, and it is the Alphabetic Survival Guide to COVID-19. And every day what we do, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we go through the alphabet, English alphabet from letter A to Z, and we give the staff information about hope, encouragement, and being able to have a little bit more to move forward. And we have that by having guest speakers from the educational world in multiple areas and giving a 12 to 14 minute talk discussion of tools and strategies, but just inspiration during this time because the adults need it too. If we're running on empty and our tank is getting lower and lower, we can't do what we need to do. So that's has been the most positive impact, because now the energy that we had 2 weeks ago, we're seeing it now back again in weeks 6 and 7, because now they feel that they have something, they have this extra bit to move forward, and the hope and the inspiration. And the last piece is that, how do we build upon what we've done right now, right? We have all now pushed the envelope. We've increased our skill set, you know, in terms of technology. Those of us that weren't very technology savvy before in the past, now we are forced to do that. We didn't have a choice. And as we do this now, how do we build upon this when we come back? Because eventually we will. Eventually we will come back to a brick and mortar school. It may look different, and it will look different than it did before, but what are we doing? So my next challenge to everyone is now, what's next, right? We were in the survival mode, but we have to get out of survival mode. And how can we thrive moving forward? How can we build upon this ability to network, to be able to build relationships with everyone? And how do we do that moving forward and begin to put the plans in place to support educators globally in terms of re-entry, and also to be more innovative moving forward?
Thank you so much, Ivan. My next question is directed to Dr. Pandey. So now, Dr. Pandey, you spoke about Rabindranath's philosophy, and you also spoke about, like, you know, how this SEL is not very new, and Dr. Ameeta also spoke about, like, you know, SEL not being something very new. So in this context, what has prevented education systems around the world where, like, you know, you could implement and embed SEL? So what has prevented our education from integrating SEL? Number one. Number two, why have we not been able to mainstream it, though you say that, like, you know, this has existed for very long? Tough question.
I think the answer is very simple. We could not mainstream it in the manner in which it should have taken place because of the wrong priority, and perhaps a little bit of myopia around the whole development of personality. And we thought that, you know, to walk into life, to get a job, and to satisfy some of your needs, your technical qualification, your cognitive abilities are enough. But slowly over the last few decades, we have seen that the cognitive abilities are getting more and more exposed in not taking you forward for a very long time. So there is a look backward while we were moving very fast with the technical knowledge and qualification. And now that realization is seeping in, and particularly this pandemic experience has sent everybody to look inwards, and the need for SEL is becoming more and more prominent.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pandey. Dr. Ameeta, would you like to add something to it, please? We can't hear you, Dr. Ameeta.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yeah. Sure.
Yeah, one of our attendees, I think Dr. Verghese, he's talking about teacher training and, you know, whether SEL sort of dovetails into constructivism. You know, I think the very fact that in our schools, we engage with at several empirical levels. We talk about community. The community service programs itself create a lot of sensitivity in students because they're moving within the communities, seeing people who are underprivileged, meeting with people who are sick, going to old age homes, going to centers where there are people who have afflictions of the mind, hospitals. And so that's been a very, very integral part of what we do at our school in Springdales. And having said that, I think that has helped a lot. Instead of just saying, you are now studying SEL, it is a sort of an informal, sensitive way of ensuring that it becomes an integral part of the children's psyche. And I think it's very important that community, a school like ours is a seamless school. And I think that it is very important that schools across the country, and they're doing it too, should really involve children in community development initiatives. Also, schools having children who have, inclusion. I think that itself, having buddies with them, remedial work that is going on with them. Because again, a child understands that here is someone else who has the same needs, but unfortunately, for whatever reasons, they have certain conditions that they have to grapple with. And so the child becomes very sensitized to a child who is autistic, or a child who's suffering from a condition like LD, or who is dyslexic is of course at a different level, but autism becomes a big issue. And so working with students who are sort of, buddies to each other, making them understand the sensitivity, that all integrates things. Today, I would like to tell you that the pandemic has thrown up some very interesting things. We have nearly 600 to 800 students from very, very poor communities in our school. So my social worker, a wonderful lady called Jasmeet Chandok, who goes across. In spite of it, we're always on the phone to check out whether they're able to get into these, this online. If they can't, then we send them telephones, and we ensure that they are a part and they don't get left behind. They don't get alienated. Helplines are created. Now, this is all SEL, because a child will remember that somebody cared for me. Somebody bothered that I was not there in that attendance list when in the morning the teacher ticked the name, and she didn't just keep quiet and say these 3 people are missing. They were called at home. They were asked, why are you missing? Then they said that, I don't have the money. I don't have the phone. What do I do? How do I go about it? So the point is, how do you look at the community that lies within your school? Do you look at it with empathy? Do you look at it with, in what ways do you make your school believe that it's a family? And yes, SEL is all integral to being a family for each other, because with family comes in emotions. And so there is a trust. There is not a trust deficit. The trust gets built up, and there's a fantastic parent-teacher, parent-school partnership that comes into play if you have very strong social, emotional learning experiences going on in the school. Bringing in volunteerism, if every child is a volunteer in the school space. So I think there's a lot to be said about how the constructivist concept is actually deconstructed in the way you look at SEL and how you can bring it into your schoolrooms. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ameeta. My next question is to Dr. Nandini. Dr. Nandini, you have been at the cutting edge of SEL in India, and you've been doing quite some work, even with the EMC square and all of that stuff. So could you share, what exactly UNESCO MGIEP has been doing in this domain, and how can schools actually take this up at their own levels?
Sure, I'm delighted to do that. So MGIEP which is the Mahatma Gandhi Institute of Education for Peace and Sustainable Development, actually has its mandate is to mainstream social emotional learning in education systems. And we are doing this across the Asia Pacific region. So we have put together a framework for social and emotional learning, which we call EMC square, where you seek to build skills of empathy, mindfulness, compassion, and critical inquiry. Okay. So the whole notion is that you might build social and emotional skills in children, but it's also very important to be able to ensure that a rational thought is linked into this. And in a world today where there are more myths than realities that are discussed, this becomes very, very important. So the notion of inquiry and question that was discussed earlier on, I think by Paul, I think is very central to this entire framework. So the other thing which MGIP has been trying to do is to make sure that this is delivered to students and children worldwide. And recognizing the fact that scale is important, we have chosen to actually develop our programs using digital pedagogies. Okay. So we've embarked on something quite ambitious, and that is created an SEL curriculum, which is actually online. And over the last year, we have implemented this in 8 countries so far in adolescent children. Okay. It's a curriculum on global citizenship, and it discusses 6 themes. The themes of that curriculum are identity, violence, extremism, governance, citizenship, okay, and migration. Okay. All these are current themes that the world is faced with and is a part of every day, yet we don't probably discuss them in our classrooms. Okay. So using these as themes, SEL is built into the entire curriculum. And we use ideas from cognitive science, which clearly show that storytelling is a great way to embed curricula. Okay, so the entire process is actually through an entire story that the child learns the curriculum. It's self-directed, and the child does the curriculum at their own pace. But at part through the curriculum, when you're getting into a discussion, maybe even on governance, you are required to pause and reflect. So reflection is an important part of the curriculum. There are times when you're presented with videos, with audios, which disturb you. Okay? And the whole notion is, if you have empathy networks in your brain, you are going to get disturbed when you see those videos. Okay? So pause and connect with your feelings inside to see, how do I feel about this? If I'm upset about it, why am I upset about it? And what can I do to be able to regulate my emotions? So the notion that the sensory brain, or the sensory modalities that human beings have, provide extremely important ways to be able to ground yourself back. So you do a breathing exercise, you can do a coloring exercise. You can find ways to engage your sensory brain so that some of the activity is directed away from feeling emotional, but now coming back to feeling grounded, and then take a response. Okay. So that tries to ensure that even in another situation, which might give rise to conflict, rather than just react, given that I now have these tools to be able to respond to it, do I not choose not to react, but instead to respond by saying, I just do clench my fist and say 1, 2, 3, and I hold my emotions back, and then I respond. So maybe that could act as a resolution to what you're encountering. So the notion of the way that the curriculum is implemented is to build emotional literacy, to build in attention regulation, to build in critical inquiry, and most importantly, to be able to build in compassion. So the fact that you just feel is not enough. You need to be able to also contribute towards changing the situation towards the better. So in short, what MGIP is trying to take a very strong stand towards is that the purpose of education needs to change from just building individual well-being towards building human flourishing. Okay. And in order for human flourishing to happen, the notion that the other is equally important becomes very important. So the notion of collaboration, connectedness, perspective taking, all of these are important if we are to be part of a society. And we know that we are a social species. It's one of the reasons, as Ivan said, that we don't want to be socially distanced. Okay, we're okay being physically distanced, but the social connect is so important. And so the social aspect of your learning and you being part of society is very critical to your well-being too. And only when you and the other both flourish will we lead to happier times and more peaceful societies. So the notion of the other is very central to this entire discussion too. So I'll just stop it at that. And
Thank you so much.
suffice it to say that this is something that we actually possess in the brain. We are all altruistic beings, and we all just have to go back and find that altruism within us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nandini. Professor Paul, you spoke about SEL can't happen in the times of fear, like the situation that we see right now. So based on your research, on your experience of having fostered SEL, what do you suggest that educators do at the moment, right now?
I'm going to link this with some of the points that were made a little bit earlier, okay? And then I'll come back to the fear point. Just to pick up on some of the things and the questions you also asked earlier. One report was made by Ivan about that education now for teachers can't just be about screen time. So we need to find other ways to meaningfully engage our children. So for example, informal education, such as play-based learning, has to be a key resource for children at home, you know, who are, you know, in social distancing, or what's be called physical distancing now, good term. I'll give you an example of this. Our own children, our son and daughter, have made a boat with cushions in our living room, and they've been sailing around the world and cooperating on the boat, and they've just passed the Bermuda Triangle and going into the Caribbean, you know, even though we live in Ireland. So you can create a world of imagination in everyday informal play-based activities, linking emotion, cooperation, and all of this. So I think that is something which to move away from for a teacher to think of, how can we create play-based learning for people at home if they're not in a school face-to-face? I think is a key question here. Your other question you asked a little bit earlier, I'd like to address as well, is why, if this has been around for so long, why has it not become part of the curriculum earlier, or the approach? I think a key factor here is the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. It was a major revolution in 1989, and the effects of this is still coming through in our education system, which it makes you know, the system genuinely child-centered, where children's voices are heard. And I think we have to recognize that this brings a power shift in schools and in society. That and that is part of a whole school approach to social and a whole community approach, you could argue as well. So we need to examine what that power shift looks like, because it moves away from a paradigm where the teacher knows everything and the teacher controls everything in the classroom. They don't. Now, my fear is that we may have a retreat if we only rely on, you know, web-based classroom learning into this type of control or didactic information processing type learning. We cannot retreat back into that style of learning. It needs to be active learning, participative, and as I mentioned already, play-based. So I think we need to talk about how do we create a school climate, a whole school approach where the power configurations are shifted, so children have their voices heard. I would also say that there is a risk that some social emotional learning could be seen as an instrument of social control of children. We don't, and young people. We do not want to be manipulating people's experiences, telling them how to think, telling them how to feel. So we need to recognize that there is a risk that some aspects of social education may go down that route, and we need to call that out and to critique it. I think in bullying prevention work, we also see that older students resist being programmed. Okay, so that because they don't want to be told what to think, feel, and do, and rightly so. You could argue all students, younger students as well, increasingly resist this. So we need so there has to be core principles of active learning, voice, ownership, and drawing on children's experiences means they are the experts, you know, in their learning. So we're co-constructing meaning with the children. Also, just about why this has not happened, I would also address the initial teacher education, the preparation of teachers. We need to have a situation where we focus on two named competences of teachers going forward: their relational competences and their cultural competences. So these are the terms we're increasingly using in Europe. okay? So the relational competence, for example, some of my student teachers, they may get the message, yes, you have to praise the child, but they may not look at the child when they're praising them. So you see some of my student teachers, they don't look at the child as they say, well done, and they're looking away. You know, so simple things like making eye contact, connecting, getting the children to ask questions. So not just respond to teachers' questions. So we need that shift in the power dynamic in the classroom, in the school. And I think that is one reason why it has taken so long to bring this into the system. Going back to your question then about, your question is on fear and how in an environment of fear can we engage with social emotional learning. My point about fear was that in a school, if you have a more old style authoritarian fear-based teacher, then people will not trust. Fear fractures trust. So, but that is not the same to say that we have to engage with a darkness in emotions, okay? I think you can have a kind of shiny, happy people type mentality for this area where you only look at positive emotions. And I think that is not a proper or appropriate way to really engage with this area. I think this is an area, it's still ripe for development. I think that we need more cultural diversity in this area as well. That a lot of it has come from the US, much of the social emotional learning paradigm. We need to open up questions about culturally diverse models of this. But certainly there is an issue here about how are we going to support our young people to confront a darkness that may be part of life, that was part of life before the COVID pandemic, but is maybe now more to the front. How do we engage with anxiety, fear? Now trauma is another level again, but I think we need to find ways in which these spaces. And obviously you can talk about language to express fear and emotion. You can talk about other modalities, pick art or music, drama. You find different ways to express. I think it's what you say is it's a phenomenological question, which is how do we engage with people's lived experiences? So in my perspective, what we need to do is we need to let people feel and experience their experiences and express their experiences. And those experiences will include fear. And we then have to let them express those fears and engage with those fears, but they need safe environments to do so, environments of trust. The other thing I would mention is when we do go back to face-to-face classes in schools, we need safe spaces in school. So we need to, from a whole school approach, to have spaces where a child can just go to who may be very stressed and just wants to sit down in a dark room and just relax. So we need we need to re-envisage our spatial and relational communications in school.
Thank you so much, Professor Paul. So now we'll open the floor for the audience to ask questions. So there's a reaction button that you can click on, and there's a raise hand. So you can raise the hand, and I will try unmuting you, and you can either come on video or just go on audio and ask your question. So before we begin this, I would just like you to know that the resources that our panelists would recommend would be listed on our website. So you can have a look at all the recommended resources, and also some of the insights that the panelists would like to share would be available on the event page of our website. And you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel to receive updates on this event and the events that we'll be having next. With this, I would like to thank all the panelists for being very candid, and also thank Learning A to Z for powering this panel discussion. So now we open the floor to all the audiences to ask questions. Thank you. So we have Mr. Amit Kumar. So could you please ask the question?
Hello, everyone. Am I audible to everyone?
Sure.
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I thank everyone for so much, enriching statements, the thoughts from the educators which came to us. And for me, just to give my brief introduction.
If you can kindly keep the question very brief because we would be running short of time. So
Sure,
ask a brief
sure.
question to a panelist.
Yeah.
Thank you.
In fact, I am going to be asking in brief because for me it is very difficult to articulate. I am in the risk assessment stream, so I'm normally work in the point blank range. So it is like this, that for me SEL is nothing new. That is point number one. When about 45 years back, when I was a child, I used to have moral science as the subject. And then he kept, contemplating why this education stream or business is not coming in the forefront as our software and other business streams. So it used to be a question to myself. Then I started thinking that it is something, which goes into the mind of the people, that teachers, schools, they are like temples where priests are there, and, students go there and they have to take whatever is given. But now the world is changing. We all know now the things are not, it is now not of 2018, it is since long. Child is always at the receiving end. We say that social and emotional learning. Why? We should also bring in social and emotional teaching. We should also talk about social and emotional upbringing of the child. Why it is only for the child to learn? Why we always say that our child is already having a lot of emotional learning? This is not the time for child. We start looking at how to inculcate more things so that this, what was that limbic cortex system that gets integrated with the prefrontal system. Right now, the important part is how we will eliminate fear and anxiety from the minds of the children in the world. That is what educators need to look at and find out, rather than building up the SEL part. I think, and also I will like to add my special appreciation for Evan Whitehead. The way, the mindset what he's having, that is
Sir, I'm so sorry, if you can please keep it brief because we need...
It is over. It is over.
Okay. So who is your question directed to, sir?
My question, I would prefer that it goes to Evan, because whatever he has talked about,
sure.
I see a lot of relevance for the post-COVID time.
Thank you so much. Ivan, can you please answer the question?
Sure. I think as we move into this post-COVID time that is upon us, I think that as we begin to look at the relevancy of what we're already doing and learning from our challenges, and our, mistakes, if you will, because, this is all a learning experience, and we have components of what we know is working. Okay. And we have to begin to build upon that and grow upon that. The idea of what this is remote learning, as we're calling it, looks like varies. And there are various challenges because there are also equity issues that exist. So although that, it would be great that everyone would have access to a device and technology, once again, the inequities that existed prior to COVID are now being magnified due to COVID. So whether it's financial, socioeconomic, whether it's a gap in between, opportunity and access, it's now being magnified. And minor things that we didn't think about before, that we took for granted, such as food and eating, has even caused a challenge that we didn't. So how can we use this to begin to look at the different scope of how we do this work post-COVID, so we don't go backward, right? We can't, like we've seen now that previous structure was flawed, and now it's deconstructed. So how do we now move forward in this space that's open, it's new? There is no roadmap, there is no rubric to say like, this is what is. Use this time to be creative as educators and build upon it, and now truly look at the system, how we can collaboratively from a global perspective, decide what is necessary for educators, what is necessary for our school systems, and how can we do this to build a new roadmap to help everyone understand what it is and what it isn't and how we can be successful.
Thank you so much, Ivan. Now we have Ratnam call Wattal. So if you may unmute yourself, please. Hello. Could you hear us, please? Ratnam?
Still mute.
It's still mute. So anyway, we have Ritu Bhandari. If you can speak, please.
A very good evening. Thank you to all the panelists for such an informative session. I'm a simple teacher at a school, and I was looking forward to attend this session. And I would like to direct my question to Dr. Paul. At the beginning, sir, you said that at this point of time, we should concentrate on the current emotion of a child. But I, as a teacher, cannot segregate what he's been going through as what has been the problem at his family, what's the background. I can't segregate my child from the current situation. So could you just kindly throw some more light on that?
Yeah, there's a well-recognized public health model of supports and needs at system level. And so the idea is you have supports for all students, you have supports for some students of moderate risk, and then you have supports for individual students who are with chronic need and deep, deep trauma. Yeah. And the question is, at which level is there a limit for what a teacher can do? Okay. And so the point I was making was that at the level of for deeply complex trauma related needs, a teacher can sure be a support, a mentor, but to be a therapist or therapeutic role of a teacher to delve into the whole range of complex needs is something which a teacher is neither trained for or it needs a multidisciplinary role around a school. So we need to see our school as the professionals in our schools as not only being teachers, we need to have other professional supports around our schools to support the deep complex needs, not simply only needs that reach a level of psychiatric difficulty, but a range of other needs that where a teacher will be out of their depth in being able to cope or be in a role where they cannot provide the intensity of deep emotional support that is needed for that child and that child deserves. So in that case, so of course emotions is not a compartment, and present emotions, have a past-based interaction, of course. So my point is that if a child is upset with something currently, then sure, I think a teacher has to engage with the child's current emotional needs. But my point was that it's not about trying to become like Sigmund Freud, to delve and probe to sort of see the historical roots of that trauma in the child. That needs the other professionals.
Thank you so much, Dr. Paul. The next question we have is, just give me a moment, please. So how do you mitigate negative effects of the pandemic once children are back in the mainstream? Who would you like to direct this question at? Who would like to take the question? I'm sorry.
The question, Aaryan, can you repeat?
This question is by Ms. Dimple Puri. The question is how to mitigate the negative effects of this pandemic once the children are back in the mainstream.
I wouldn't mind taking that, Aaryan.
Sure, ma'am.
Firstly, I would like to just quickly, I think Mrs. Puri somebody else had also asked a previous question because in India, teachers play a very important role. It is an empirical role where children are concerned. So we play that role of looking into their homes, into their families, because it's a very different kind of culture that we have here. The teacher is sort of very meaningfully involved with child rearing in all aspects, psychological, domestic, and so on. It's very difficult for us to say that, this belongs to the specialist and we won't do that. It's a different cultural construct to the States or to other countries. So having said that, I think the most important thing is that the children are going to come back to school from a completely unnatural situation. And they're going to come back with a complete hiatus of their emotions, their learning, and they're going to come into a space where suddenly they'll want to be with other people and do all that they couldn't do from the limitation that they had. So I think we have to really re-look at the syllabus and not get so involved with pen and paper and get involved with examinations and get involved with, I taught you content in those 3 months online. Now, come on, let's do the examinations. I think it's very important here to sort of have conversations, to get children into a routine where they can have individualized sport programs, yoga. We can get them, separately in a social distancing, have some kind of wellness breathing, community breathing, where they are again socially distanced. So basically to be able to empower them from themselves, because certainly they have been extremely fragmented and they need that kind of emotional stability, which I'm not saying the home didn't give it to them, but an adolescent doesn't like to be trapped in a home, I mean, there is a certain construct about an adolescence. He wants to be free with his own peer. So involvement of a child with the peer in a different manner and all different ways, and trying to bring children together and make them understanding the interdependence of life, so to speak. So ultimately, we're all connected, and bringing this into the classroom more than just getting involved with maths, English, arithmetic, and writing. So I think that has to be the central focus for a while, at least, the emotional construct of a child.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ameeta. So right now we just have about 5 more minutes left with us. So I would request each of the panelists to have a minute and say whatever they have to say about the entire initiative of today. So if you want to summarize it in your own ways, you're more than welcome if you can. So thank you. So we can start with Ivan.
Thank you. I just want to, say that as we think about social emotional learning, look into the mindset that it's not an add-on. It's what we do and how we should do it, and that in order to implement true social emotional learning, we have to make sure that all of us are taking care of our social emotional well-being as well, because it is a trickle-down effect to the students and families that we serve. And to begin to understand that this pandemic has now opened the conversation around social emotional learning, because we are now experiencing it as individuals and we have a common experience. So now the question that I pose to everyone is, what's next? Will you stay in the state that you were before? Are you looking to go back to what was and what existed, or are you willing to move forward and to change the landscape of what we're doing? Peace and blessings.
Thank you, Ivan. Dr. Nandini?
I'm very happy that you brought this conversation to the forefront, and I hope there is a lot that people take away. The two thoughts that I think I want to leave people with are, I think it's as important for children to realize that adults go through social and emotional learning challenges too. So making your own vulnerability as part of the conversation is one of the best ways to start to build a safe space, that I'm as human as you are. And I've gone through these tough times too. So you start a conversation there and build around it. And not necessarily to think of this pandemic as something negative that happened. I think it's given us, it's something that happened and we've all dealt with it, and we've hopefully come out stronger in the process. So to be able to come together and to discuss the wealth of and the warmth of humanity, the connectedness of it, and what were the number of positive things that also happened for it, and to also have a lot of gratitude for what we continue to have and cherish. So I think there's a lot that we can take away to make sure that we build a positive space, a secure space, and to engage in dialogue with each other, so that it's as a almost as a community we embody what is called in India Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, that the whole is one, the world is one big family. I think the pandemic has established that without doubt.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nandini. Professor Paul, if you...
Thanks. I want to respond to the question that came from I think the teacher. What do we do when you go back to a school now after the pandemic, when we go back to school? So I think it is a very, very important question. And here I would emphasize that social emotional learning is not only a curriculum issue, it is a relational process issue. So we need to look at our relational processes. So I think for the children, who come back, and first of all, we need to listen to them. We need to listen to their their experiences. We need to draw out their experiences as part of a dialogue. So, and often that means you have to have a more flexible approach in the classroom to create that listening dialogue process, to draw out their experience, but also their questions, and especially their questions about the pandemic, so that you these issues and you confront them in some way as part of a relational dialogue. I would also emphasize the point that social distancing in school means we're going to change the spaces in our school. I think we need to treat this as an opportunity. How can we create new spaces in our school that are spaces of trust and safe spaces, but also spaces that have the ownership of the children? So that question, I think, if you go back as an educator into your school, is how can we reshape the school space so that children have ownership, but also have a space where they can listen, first of all, to themselves. If they need silence, silence is something that a lot of children we work with say they would love to have spaces for silence. Now, you may say they've had too much silence having been away, but I think we need to give them spaces for silence as well as spaces for self-expression. So how will we do that?
Thank you so much, Professor Paul. Dr. Ameeta, if you could kindly make your remarks.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
I think for the teacher community, it's been a very challenging time, and they have really been troopers, because suddenly the pandemic, everybody talked about technology, and everybody said they had technology and understanding of technology, but at the end of the day, everybody was grappling. And the way that the teacher community has come out of it, I think coming back to school is going to at least sort of unburden the teacher from the kind of difficulties and challenges that they have been facing, all these, and they continue to face. So I think the relationship with the child, the teacher, the understanding of blended learning, and the fact that the teacher's mindset has completely changed in this pandemic. And I think a mindset actually doesn't change over time. It changes in trauma. And I think this is the trauma that has created this opportunity from the crisis. And so this is the kind of opportunity that teachers have got, and I'm sure they're never going to be the same again. And even when they enter their classes, they will realize the importance of relationships with children, and also the importance of technology, because we don't want to be caught on the wrong foot. God, something happens. So we have to be in a state of readiness, which I think is very important at all levels. And I think it'll work well if teachers also are an integral part of what happens when you reach school. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ameeta. Next, I would like to request Dr. Pandey to make his remarks in less than a minute.
less than a minute. So thank you very much. I think, this entire SEL discussion is about providing a cushion to the children to move forward, right? And that cushion will, suggest to them as to how they had to use their coping skills, which are warranted at this particular juncture. And SEL is about, creativity and art. And creativity is something, it is an expression of that surplus that we accumulate due to our connecting with the world. And SEL in that sense becomes, of utmost importance, because in any situation, we have to deal with problems. And dealing with problems, as I said earlier, is not only a function of your cognitive abilities, but it is a function of how you have been emotionally and socially intelligent and competent. So that problem solving ability will come out of this. And the next thing is that, as Dr. Nandini said, that in the context of the Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, as we call it, I think we need to, ingest in our children and imbue in them these competency of social emotional learning, so that they become a very useful, productive global citizens. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pandey. So now we are almost at the end of the panel discussion. I would like to thank each of the panelists for having joined us. It's an amazing experience to have listened to all of you. I would just like to highlight one thing before we end the show today. If you have been using words like Corona warriors and fighters and stuff like that, please try to rethink that, because you're trying to create a social divide then. So that is one thing. There's a very interesting research that has happened recently where they're talking about how this is affecting young people, how it is affecting different societies. So I'll tell you why exactly you should not be using Corona warriors and Corona fighters and all of this. It's very simply put, the moment you say that this is a war, then you're subjecting all our doctors to give their lives away. I mean, so no doctor has taken an oath to give his or her own life away. They have taken an oath to protect lives. So in fact, we need to support all people on the front lines by supporting them with PPEs and other kits and whatever they require, instead of calling them warriors and letting them suffer. So this is my humble request, and I'm sure this also has an impact on the social and emotional well-being of people all around. So thank you so much for being connected with us. Now, the next panel discussion is on the 14th of May. The panel discussion would try to explore, is preparing for peace and global citizenship a priority? So this is the panel discussion that we would be taking it forward on 14th of May. So I look forward to having you back, and I thank each of the panelists for all their contribution and for the grace and generosity of having accepted the invitation. So it takes a lot of effort to put in a team from all around the world. So thank you so much to all of you, and stay with us. So you can follow our social media updates, one, and second, all these resources, like I told you, would be available on our website. So the recommendations by our panelists would be there. So thank you so much. Have a great time and stay safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Aaryan, and thank you, distinguished panelists.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Excellent. Excellent job. Thank you.
Wonderful listening to all of you. And all of you, please stay safe and blessed.
You were amazing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aaryan. Thank you.
Let's all stay connected. Thank you.
Yes, let's do that.
We can't stay in contact as a group. I think we could do a lot as a group together.
Yes, I think so. We have a good collective impact.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Aaryan, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.